Well, I got Augustine wrong, and let me explain. This channel isn't about scoring points, it's about the truth. And a couple of weeks ago I said that Augustine sounds really Protestant in his anti-Pelagian writings. This week I went away and did my Master's Intensive on the early Church Fathers, and I've got to admit, I got Augustine wrong. Why? Well, Augustine is rightly championed as a doctor of grace. He talks about grace probably more than any early Church Father. But his understanding of grace needs to be understood in light of his Donatist controversy. In the 4th century, a violent persecution broke out. Many Christians lapsed and denied the faith, but when persecution was over, they wanted to come back to the church. Now, there was a movement called the Donatist movement, and they said no way, and they formed their own holy huddle and created this kind of church within the church. And that's when the Catholic Church, or the Great Church, called on St. Augustine. And Augustine argued that unless you're part of the Great Church, then your baptism isn't efficacious. And so Augustine's understanding of salvation was neatly tied to his understanding of the church. The two are inseparable. Baptism remits sin, but it's only effective if you're part of the Great Church. And so the Pelagian controversy. If we want to understand his theology of grace, we need to read it in light of his conversation with the Donatists. It's not about works, it's not about merit, it's about grace, but that grace is given in baptism to remit your sins if you're part of the right church where the sacraments can be administered. That is not a modern Protestant way of talking about salvation. But while Augustine was more disappointing than I'd imagined him to be, Cyril of Alexandria was far better than I'd ever imagined. Because the controversy in the East was more about the doctrine of God and Christ than it was about the church, Cyril unpacks his understanding of salvation through union with Christ. And in his commentary on the Gospel of John, he sounds pretty Protestant in places. Have a listen to what he says here. He says, "The work of God is that you believe in the one whom he himself has sent. And indeed, salvation through faith is truly superior to worship that is of the law and in types, and grace that justifies is superior to the commandment that condemns." Now in Cyril, there's a focus on justifying grace, the Christ who justifies, the God who justifies, and we who are the justified ones. And whenever in his writing Cyril talks about us, he uses passive forms, and when he talks about God and Christ, he uses active forms. And so Augustine was a disappointment. Cyril of Alexandria was way better than I imagined. Tell me what you think. I'm also planning on doing longer videos on YouTube of the theology of the Church Fathers.